All right, welcome back to your Daily Read Aloud. Who was Harriet Tubman? We are more than halfway through the book at this point. We've learned about her childhood. We learned about her marriage. We learned about her first journey north to freedom. She became a free woman. And then instead of just living her life free, what did she decide to do? Cadence?
To go get her parents.
She's going back down south. She's already gone a few times. She brought back some of her family. She tried to go back and get her husband. What did she discover when she went back? Chloe? Yep, he found himself a new wife. So, she kind of abandoned that idea, and I'm kind of relieved anyway, because he wasn't very nice to her. And now what is her new task that she has to do? Emma?
Going back to get people she didn't even know.
Okay, she's been doing that, but she just found out her parents are going to be sold. So she said, I've got to go get them. Now, how is this one going to be different than the other ones for Ben and Old Rit? Hayden?
How is she still Harriet Tubman if he's married to someone?
Well, once you take someone's name, you don't keep flipping back and forth often. Okay, how is this one going to be different? Quentin?
Well, they have to ride horses.
Okay, her parents are old, so they can't walk hundreds or thousands of miles to freedom. They can't walk through the rivers. So she got close to where they're at. She found a horse, which she stole it, okay, or a mule. And then she built a wagon out of scraps she found in the woods, which is pretty amazing. So her plan is to sneak her parents away on a wagon. Okay, and that is where we stopped. All right, I will reread the last paragraph we read before we stopped. Harriet returned to the plantation in Maryland in 1857. She found an old horse named Dolly May, so it was a horse. Luring the horse to the woods, Harriet tied her to a tree. Then she made a crude wagon from old carriage wheels, an axle, some boards, and some rope. Now she was ready to get her parents. They could ride to Canada. Harriet rode with them part of the way, but it became too risky for her to ride out in the open. She got out and went the rest of the way on foot. In St. Catharines, she met her parents again. For the first time, they were free. Harriet found them a house in Auburn, New York. Now part of her money went to support Ben and Rit. She had several different jobs. Sometimes she spoke at anti-slavery meetings to make extra money. At first, Harriet was shy in front of a crowd, but she was a good storyteller. People liked to hear about her narrow escapes. Soon she became an excellent speaker. She traveled to different cities and gave her speeches. In 1860, Harriet was on her way to Boston to give a speech. She stopped to visit a relative in Troy, New York. Trouble was brewing. A former slave, Charles Nale, had been caught by a slave hunter. Nale waited at the courthouse for his hearing. Many people were there. Some were for slavery. Others were against it. The judge decided Nale had to return to his master.
No.
The crowd was furious. A riot broke out and Harriet got involved. She risked her life to help Nale escape. When her wounds had healed, she went on to Boston to make her speech. Later that year, Harriet made one final trip to the South. She brought a family of 2 small children to the North. A family with 2 small children to the North. After that, Harriet's friends in the anti-slavery movement convinced her to stop. She could no longer be a conductor on the Underground Railroad. The slave owners wanted her dead. So they used to want her with a reward, and at one point it was $40,000. Now she was just wanted, dead or alive. Harriet was worth too much alive. She would have to find another way to work for freedom. So she was so valuable to her community, they said, we can't risk you getting caught, so you have to find something else to do. Chapter 6, A Country at War. All right, we've been learning a lot about this war. What war are we going to be talking about here? Noah? Civil War. In 1861, Civil War broke out between the northern and the southern states. There were many reasons for the war. One of them was slavery. The South wanted to keep its slaves. People in the North wanted to end slavery throughout the United States. So the South decided to secede, or pull away from the North. The 11 southern states formed their own army. They called themselves the Confederate States of America. The North didn't want the South to secede. The North went to war to make the southern states rejoin the Union, which is what the North called itself. John Andrew, the governor of Massachusetts, asked Harriet to work for the Union Army. Andrew had heard Harriet speak. He knew about her life as a slave. He knew about her work on the Underground Railroad. He believed she could help the Northern cause. Here was another way for Harriet to work for freedom. She said yes. The first thing she did was travel to Port Royal Island off the coast of South Carolina. Thousands of Northern soldiers were stationed there waiting to fight. So were thousands of runaway slaves. By law, the slaves were not yet free, but they wanted to join the Northern Army. They wanted to help fight for their freedom. But there were problems. The slaves still thought and acted like slaves. They expected the white soldiers to give them orders. They were not used to thinking or acting like free men and women. That's where Harriet came in. She taught the slaves to see themselves as free people. She taught the soldiers to work with the slaves. Harriet also helped black women. She taught them how to make things they could sell. She helped them find ways to earn a living as free people in the North, not as slaves in the South. Many of the slaves in Port Royal were sick or hurt. Often their owners had wounded them, trying to prevent their escape. A hospital was set up for them on the island. So Harriet became a nurse. She cleaned wounds. She put cool cloths on the foreheads of patients with high fevers. Flies buzzed around the wounded patients all day long. Harriet shooed them away. Some of the patients had dysentery. Dysentery caused horrible stomach cramps. Most people who caught it died. Harriet remembered the medicines from certain roots and herbs her mother used to make. Would they help her patients? Harriet wanted to find out. She went to the woods, gathered water lilies, and pulled up their roots. She hunted for cranesbill. She boiled these plants into a strong brew. There was a man dying of dysentery. Harriet gave him some of the brew to drink. In a few days, the man began to get better. People thought it was another one of Harriet's miracles. If she was at your bedside, you would not die. The war dragged on into 1862 and beyond. For a while, it seemed as if the South would win. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, both Northern and Southern, were wounded or killed. Still, neither side would give in. The bloody fighting continued. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves in the Confederate States. Southern black men could join the Northern Army. They formed their own all-black regiments. They had wanted to help the Union cause, and now they could. Still, the war did not end. Along with the black regiments, there was a new role for Harriet. Colonel James Montgomery asked if she could be a scout for his black troops. In effect, he was asking her to be a spy. Hudson?
Is this book based on Before She Was Harriet?
Yeah, because
That book and this book are just about the same person. So they're both, I have not read that book, but it's a true story about her life, so they're both just different accounts of her life. Noah?
it said before she was Harriet, she was a spy, she was a nurse, and all that.
Yep. All right, so now she's going to be a spy in the Civil War, which is pretty exciting. Do you think most women were asked to be spies in the war? No. Harriet was a perfect choice. As a small black woman, she looked harmless. She could slip behind enemy lines and approach the blacks who were with their masters in the Confederate Army. These blacks would trust her. They might share information about the Southern Army. This information could help the Union cause. Harriet became commander of intelligence operations for the Union Army's Department of the South. 9 scouts were under her command. So not only was she a spy, but she was in charge of 9 other spies, and she told them what to do. She was in charge of an area that went from South Carolina to Florida. Though the white men she led weren't used to reporting to a black woman, they quickly came to respect and admire her. Being a spy was dangerous work, but Harriet was used to danger. She used her knowledge of the rivers to help lead an invasion. On June 2nd, 1863, General Montgomery, Harriet, and about 300 black soldiers set out along the Combahee River in South Carolina. Their aim was to knock out the railroad tracks that ran by the river's edge. They also wanted to destroy the bridges that crossed it. By destroying bridges and tracks, the Southern troops could not get supplies. Without food, guns, and first aid supplies, the South could not win the war. Harriet and the others traveled in the dark until they reached a bend. Harriet told the pilot of the boat to stop. There was a camp of Confederate soldiers nearby. Quietly, the men got out and surrounded the camp. They captured the Southern soldiers without firing one shot. More Northern gunboats came up the river. The Southern soldiers saw them and called for help. Harriet's men were too quick for them. They set fire to their food supplies and their cotton. They also set fire to their big plantation homes. Many slaves were still working on the plantations. When they saw the black soldiers, the slaves rushed to join them. The Union gunboats finally turned around and headed back. The raid was over. The Union won the battle, and 756 slaves had joined their Union forces. With more and more men on their side, the Union had a better chance of winning the war. Harriet continued to lead Union troops into enemy territory. She always carried her pistol and was not afraid to use it. But she still wore a long skirt. It got in her way. However, she could not dress in men's clothes the way she had done before. Dressing in men's clothes wasn't considered proper. Ladies were supposed to wear long skirts and lots of petticoats underneath them. What a bother. Okay, so we all know what a long skirt is. A petticoat would be these kind of fluffy slips that you'd put under your dress. I'll stand up and try to show you. So instead of your skirt just going straight down, it would kind of poof out to the sides. So you've probably seen dresses like that, so the bottoms are all full. So just think about having to wear that. I can't even imagine teaching in that. But how could you be in charge of soldiers wearing that? Wouldn't you want to put pants on, Angie?
Yes, and what's a pistol?
A pistol's a little gun, a handgun. All right, so back in this time, women had to wear dresses. No women wore pants. In fact, when my mom, so my mom's like 65, when she was in school, she had to wear skirts every day. Not until she was late in high school, she was allowed to wear pants. So it took a long time for women to have the freedom to dress the way they wanted to. Josiah?
My grandma, not the one that's still alive, but there's one that died a few years ago. She went to a library with pants on and got spanked.
Yeah. So it might seem kind of funny to all of us now, but if we were here like 40, 50 years ago, all you girls would be wearing skirts or dresses, and that was it. That was your only option. All right, so we obviously know that she did not want to wear all that stuff. So that's why she's saying, what a bother. Shh. Then Harriet heard about Amelia Bloomer. Mrs. Bloomer had designed a sensible costume for females. The costume was made up of a small jacket, short skirt, and full trousers, which are pants. So it's a skirt on top, but pants come out underneath it. So the skirt on top is short, and then you got pants on. So it's next best thing to wearing pants, right? Harriet wanted one. As she said, I made up my mind that I would never wear a long dress on another expedition, but would have a bloomer as soon as I could get it. Harriet worked as a spy for 2 years. By 1864, she was tired. She wanted to go back home and rest. She also wanted to see her parents. All right, now we're going to read a little side note about Frederick Douglass, who's a very famous American. A great speaker and important leader in the abolitionist movement, remember those are people that hated slavery, thought it was evil, was Frederick Douglass. He was born a slave in Maryland around 1817. As a boy, he secretly taught himself to read and write. So just think about that. If you were a little kid and you weren't allowed to read and write, he still taught himself in secret how to read and write. Pretty impressive. This was an extremely dangerous thing to do. Had he been caught, he could have been put to death. After his escape from slavery in 1838, Douglass began giving lectures about his life. He was a powerful and brilliant speaker. Many people came to hear what he had to say. Then, in 1845, he wrote and published Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. In it, he described the many cruelties slaves were forced to endure, like whippings and beatings. Because the book revealed his master's identity, Douglass had to flee to England, which is in Europe, where sympathetic supporters bought his freedom. Back in the United States, Douglass published another anti-slavery paper, the North Star. During the Civil War, he was an advisor to President Abraham Lincoln. He also helped recruit black soldiers for the Union Army and worked to make sure that newly freed blacks had the right to vote. Douglass published 2 other books, My Bondage and My Freedom in 1855 and The Life and Times of Frederick Douglass in 1881. He served in several government posts, including Minister to Haiti. He died in Washington in 1895. So as you get older, you will learn more about Frederick Douglass. All right, now this part's interesting. So she was a spy, right? The government still owed her $1,800 for her work, which, remember, back in this time, that was a lot of money. Though many of Harriet's important friends, including the famous black speaker, minister, and leader Frederick Douglass, wrote to the government for her, she was never paid the money. Never. Never. Still to this day. When she was sure her parents were well, and after she had gotten back to her own strength, Harriet returned to work. She went to Fortress Monroe Hospital in Washington, D.C. There she cared for black patients. Soon, she was promoted to head nurse. All right, now we have a little side note about constitutional amendments. An amendment is a change to the Constitution. The men who wrote the Constitution in the 1700s knew that the country would change in the future. The government had to find a way to deal with these changes. So they provided a way to make changes to the Constitution, amendments. This meant that lawmakers could vote to add certain important new laws. Since the 1700s, Congress had added many new amendments to the Constitution. These amendments reflected the changes needed and attitudes of the American people. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were all passed in the years after the Civil War. These amendments put an end to slavery and guaranteed the right of citizenship to all people, regardless of their race or color. In April 1865, the Civil War ended. The Union Army had won the war. There would be no more Confederacy, but instead a single and united nation, the way it had been before all the fighting. In December 1865, slavery was finally abolished. That means destroyed, done away with forever, throughout the United States. Not only had Harriet lived to see it, she had helped to make it happen. All right, so before we go on, let's just review all the different jobs Harriet's done so far. How did she help in all this effort? Give me one thing at a time. Hayden?
She helped guide the slaves to the Underground Railroad.
Okay, she was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Cadence?
She was a nurse.
She was a nurse. She worked at lots of field hospitals during the war.
She was a spy.
She was a spy for the Union Army. She went behind enemy lines and spied. Josiah?
And she changed the mind of a lot of people.
She did. She was a really good speaker. We can say she's inspirational, right? She would help people determine how they were going to treat others.
So since they don't know how old she is, when she was born, but did they know how old she was?
Roughly. So we'll get to that toward the end. We know the year, 1 or 2 years where they think she was born. All right, other than that, the only other things I can think of, she learned a lot doing a lot of the work when she was a slave. She was really good in the forest. She knew how to use herbs from the ground and plants to make medicines. And she was a commander for the Union Army. She led troops into battle. So she's lived a very full life. Yes? Forgot. All right. I'm going to, well, we are so close. I'm just going to try to finish this today. Chapter 7, Moses of her people. Harriet went back to her house in Auburn, New York. Her parents were old and needed her. Other former slaves came there for her help too. Even though blacks were free, their troubles had not ended. They still did not have the same rights as white Americans. For instance, blacks were not allowed to live in white neighborhoods, shop in stores owned by whites, or worship in churches that white people attended. Black children could not go to school with white children. They went to schools just for blacks. Lots of white people would not hire black people to do a job. Many former slaves were poor or sick. They had no way to earn a living and nowhere to go. Harriet took them all in. She never said no. Harriet needed money to care for these people. How would she earn it? Help came from a white woman named Sarah Bradford. Sarah visited Harriet in Auburn. Harriet told her many stories about slavery and helping people escape. Even though she had never learned to read or write, Harriet had an excellent memory. She remembered the smallest details. And because she had memorized passages from the Bible, the way she told these stories was filled with drama and poetry. She told about her many trips on the Underground Railroad, the war, and her work as a nurse and a spy. In 1869, Sarah Bradford published Harriet's biography. It was called Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman. All the money it earned would go to Harriet. That same year, Harriet married Nelson Davis, which makes me happy. She finally married a nice guy. They had met when he was fighting for the North in one of the Black Brigades. Nelson was a handsome man 20 years younger than Harriet, but he had come down with tuberculosis, a disease that affected the lungs. He needed caring for, too. Harriet's first husband, John Tubman, had been killed in Maryland in 1867. Harriet had never really had the chance to make a home or raise a family with him. Nelson gave her another chance. After he got better, he worked as a bricklayer. The money he earned helped support the people in Harriet's care. Harriet always had more stories to tell, and she always needed money. So Sarah Bradford wrote another book, Harriet Tubman, The Moses of Her People. It was published in 1886. More money came from the new book, but still, there never seemed to be enough. In 1888, Nelson Davis died. Harriet's parents had died a few years earlier. Now she was all alone again, but she kept working. She was already caring for several poor, old, or sick black people in her own home. But to care for more people, she needed a bigger house and more land. Not content with what she was doing, she dreamed of something bigger, a hospital and a rest home for any black man or woman who needed it. Harriet earned money by raising vegetables on the land she owned and selling them door to door. When she stopped at a house, she was often invited inside. Sometimes she was offered her favorite drink, a cup of tea with butter. Ugh. Sitting at the table and sipping the tea, she spun her tales from the past. She would describe a Civil War battle with these words. And then we saw the lightning, and that was the guns. And then we heard the rain falling, and that was the drops of blood falling. And when we came to get the crops, it was dead men that we reaped. Or she might talk about President Lincoln, who had been assassinated in 1865 by John Wilkes Booth. She remembered how an old man had responded to the death by saying, "We kneel upon the ground with our faces in our hands, and our hands in the dust, and cry to thee for mercy, O Lord, this evening." Sometimes she went even further back in time, telling stories she had heard in her own childhood about the old slave ships that brought Africans to America, stories about the whippings, chains, and branding irons. Another way Harriet earned money was by giving speeches. Once, she was asked to speak along with the famous women's rights workers, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So those women were both trying to get the right for women to vote. So that was their big thing. The two women had worked together for years. They were working to prove that women were equal to men. They also worked to get women many new rights, including the right to vote. In the 19th century, only men could vote. Harriet was a good example of how women were equal to men. Couldn't she do all the things a man could do and more? Standing in front of the audience, she said, "I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years and can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track and I never lost a passenger." Then Harriet learned that the land across from her house was about to be sold. Here was her chance. She didn't have enough money, but a bank loaned her what she needed. Now she could make her dream come true. She moved the men and women she cared for into one of the 2 houses on the new property. Soon, people from all over came to the house. They read about Harriet's life and wanted to meet her. She had many interesting visitors. People wrote to her, too. She received a letter, a medal, and a black silk shawl from Queen Victoria from England. Yet Harriet still had money worries. In 1903, she turned her house over to the African Methodist Episcopal Zionist Church. She would still live in the house, but the church would pay the bills. Yet Harriet, who had never asked the people who lived with her for any money, didn't like certain changes made by the church. She said, "When I gave the home over to the Zion Church, what do you suppose they did? They made a rule that nobody should come in without $100. Now I wanted to make a rule that nobody could come in unless they had no money. What's the good of a home if a person who wants to go in it has to have money?" Harriet was an old woman now. Still, she liked taking walks through town. When she couldn't walk anymore, her grandnieces and grandnephews pushed her in a wheelchair. At the age of 92, she could no longer go out, but people still came to see her. And even though she could not read herself, she still had someone read her the newspaper every day. In the spring of 1913, Harriet caught pneumonia. She knew she would not get well. With one of her brothers and some good friends at her side, she died. The town of Auburn decided to honor her. People gathered in the Auburn Auditorium. Flags flew at half-mast. Many speakers praised the work she'd spent her whole life doing. A bronze plaque was placed on the front entrance of the Auburn courthouse in her memory. It says, "With rare courage, she led over 300 up from slavery to freedom." Harriet will always be remembered for her courage, for her strength, and most of all, for her fierce devotion to the freedom of her people. And that is the end of Harriet Tubman. All right, we'll see you guys later.